Okay, so good morning and welcome to this webinar, which is part of the Infra for Next Gen project. This webinar will talk about using social surveys to answer research questions. And this webinar has been put together by me, Ruxandra Comănaru. And as Yuliya said, I represent here the ESS, the European Social Survey, which is based at City St. George University of London. And David Consolazio, who is from EVS, European Value Study at the University of Milan. Our colleague Yuliya Kazakova, who represents the Gender and Generation Program, is not going to be with us today, but she has contributed to these slides as well. So here's a bit of an outline about today. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are, and then I'll present a theoretical overview of the strategies to design a good research question. I think many of us here are researchers, but I know some of you might be students. So we'll go a bit back to the basics on how to design a good research questions. And then I'll pass on to my colleague David, who will tell you about where to find the data to answer your research questions and how to use available online tools to do preliminary analysis. So we are part of the Infra for Next Gen project, which is a Horizon Europe project lasting for 4 years. It started last year. We've just had our first year kind of meeting with everyone. And we have 3 more years to go. So please keep an eye on the different webinars, workshops, and hackathons that are being organized as part of this project, because you might find other things that you'll find interesting. We are the research fellows affiliated with this project. So representing the, as I said, the European Social Survey, the European Value Study, and the Gender and Generation Program. I'm not going to attempt to say where the GGP is based, but it is the CNAVE, I think, and the Netherlands Interdisciplinary Demographic Institute. And we are leading on the work packages 2 to 6, which is also considered the engine room of the project, because we are basically doing a bit of everything on this on these work packages. So anything from, as David will tell you about, the inventories, data summaries, and other things. Have a look at our website. There's a lot of information there, and as outputs become available, we are posting them on the website. Okay, so let's start with the actual webinar. So a bit of a theoretical overview. What do we do to investigate the world? Like, there's different ways that we can investigate the world in. And we always start from observations. Like, we observe that there are new phenomena happening, and we need to establish a new explanation about a particular topic or identify potential clues to explain this phenomena that we observe in the world. So from this observation, we move on to the explanation. We try to introduce a set of factors that account for how and why this phenomena is taking place. And this will form our hypothesis. And then we have to move on to testing this hypothesis, right? This is what we do in social research. We try to test our hypothesis, and we devise a way to test this hypothesis under certain circumstances, in a particular point in time. Something should occur. If it does occur, then the explanation was correct. Our hypothesis stands. If it does not occur, the explanation should be modified and tested again. One thing that is very important in social research is replication. We try to kind of see that the same phenomena appears under the same circumstances. The same outcome can be found if the circumstances stay the same. Of course, there is an issue that the circumstances are constantly changing, but the need for replication stands. When you replicate something in social research, you can also observe trends over time. And this is something that we can show you how to do in the data. So here's a list of the different steps that we take in quantitative research. We start with defining the research questions, and then we operationalize the concepts and try to find the indicators or the variables that will help us answer those research questions. Variables we have to think about them as dependent, independent, or control variables. We consider the relationship between these variables and how they might work together, and we formulate our hypothesis. I'll talk a little bit about this in a second, talk more about this. We also need to choose the items that we'll use to illustrate the hypothesis. We will select the sample to be tested, and this is in the case that we actually can afford to do the testing ourselves. And as we know, the sample, the larger, the better, right? The more power it gives our analysis, the more participants, respondents we have in a survey study. And then we collect the data, or we find data that is already available. And what we will show you today is that there is a lot of data that already exists. And we invite you to explore it and try to see what you can do with what's already there if you don't want to collect your own data. And then we do the statistical analysis. And again, this is something that David will tell you more about, how you can use tools that are already online to help you do this analysis. And the last thing that we should do is write up and disseminate our research. This is a point that is very important. We need to disseminate experiments and tests that we conduct, even if the results don't support necessarily our hypothesis. And this will help other researchers as well in understanding how things worked for our particular research. And sometimes it's a problem because whenever we write for academic journals, we want to show that we were right, like our hypothesis stands. But it's sometimes important to write things that don't work as well, so that others don't repeat the same study that might not lead to the right conclusions. So let's spend a little bit of time on this slide. Basically, we have the concepts, the indicators, and the questions. We need to move from the concept to the indicator, and then to the actual questions or items that we'll include in the study. So if we think about the concept is something that is abstract and it can't really be measured directly. It needs to be very clearly defined. For example, if we think of a concept like poverty or sleep or happiness or loneliness, these are concepts that are quite abstract in terms of what they are from a point of view of social research. So we might be interested in studying poverty, but we can't really ask participants, how poor or rich are you on a scale from 1 to 10? Or, if we want to study happiness, the same. Sometimes you can ask how happy you are, but you want to define a little bit more about what you particularly understand about happiness. And so what makes up this concept are the indicators. So we can choose different indicators to measure that particular concept. And that actually leads us to operationalize the concept in terms of how we want to investigate it. It's also important to know that the number of indicators needed will vary depending on the concept that we want to study and the research aims, and that there are multiple questions sometimes per indicator. So we might have a concept, several indicators, and several questions per indicator. Doing a literature review can help us identify the different concepts and indicators, and it might help us assess whether and which might be suitable for a particular survey. Apart from the literature review in the field, we can also use different forms of qualitative research to help us find relevant indicators or to formulate questions. So if there is potentially a new concept in the field that we're trying to investigate, we might need to go back to see how we should understand this concept. There might not be enough literature to explain what the concept is and how we would choose the indicators for it. In that case, we might want to do some focus groups. We might want to do some qualitative interviews to see how we end up operationalizing that concept. So let's try to think of an example. If we think of poverty, for example, or material deprivation as a concept, it might be it's a complex concept, and we can't really ask participants, as I said, to just tell us how poor or rich they are. So the way we might think about it is things like not being able to afford something that is essential, like paying the bills or dealing with unexpected expenses. Oops, sorry. We might want to think about food poverty, like children going to school without having breakfast. This is one of the questions on a survey. We might want to think about financial insecurity and so on. So how would we actually ask these questions on a survey? We need to find like the right way to ask these questions, right? So during the past 12 months, for example, have any of the following happened to you or your partner because of a shortage of money? So for example, you could ask, could you not pay electricity, gas, council tax, water bills on time? Or did you have to forgo a meal so that there is enough food in the house for your children? Or could you not pay for your car insurance or registration or MOT on time? Did you have to borrow money from friends or family to meet everyday living costs? So these are the kind of questions that would translate into indicators that form our concept of poverty or material deprivation. So it's very important to define the key concepts, to give them operational definitions. So what do the concepts in our hypothesis actually mean? So a concept, as I said, is an abstract phenomenon. It's a construct that we want to investigate, and it needs to be transferred into a measurable variable. And here, it's really the researcher's choice. Sometimes some concepts are so complex and so broad that we really need to narrow it down and choose like what are the aspects that we're interested in. And the validity of the findings depends largely on how we define these concepts and the questions we ask on a survey to cover these concepts. So I'll give you an example. This is an older example from the time when I was doing my master's. I'm not going to say how many years ago, but you can see by the, the sources that I'm citing. So one of the things that I was interested in when I was doing my master's thesis was the heritage language, like people's heritage language. If you ask someone, what is your heritage language, you need to define what this heritage language actually means. Because even within the field of sociolinguistics, there are different definitions. So one of the definitions is a language that a person is familiar with from home. They speak it, or at least they understand it. But there is another definition coming from the same year from a different researcher. And this definition is the ancestral language of a person or a group, regardless of whether the language is still used in the home or not. So as you can see, just by choosing one of these two definitions as to cover our concept of heritage language, we already need to look at different indicators. We already would ask like very different very different questions about heritage language that would define our concept. So again, the same concept might be seen from different points of view as meaning different things. And we have to be very clear about this, because otherwise, if we don't define this in a way that our respondents would understand it, our measures are not going to be reliable. Everybody will understand the concept differently, and therefore provide you an answer that is not necessarily consistent. So then when we look at the analysis, when we try to do our statistical analysis, we might find things that are not necessarily that clear or not that straightforward, because we have not defined the concept so clearly. Let's look at another example. And this is an example that you can find a lot of survey items, questions in the studies that we'll talk about today. So religiosity is a very interesting concept, but how would we operationalize it? What items would you include on a scale that measures this concept? So here are just some examples that you can find in our surveys. What is your religion? And here you provide a list of the most common religions in a particular context. How often do you attend religious services? Do you believe in God or another life force? How important is spirituality in your daily life? And so on. So as you can see, there are different aspects that would cover the concept of religiosity. And if you're interested in doing an in-depth analysis of religiosity in a particular context, you might want to include all of these questions, or you might want to choose just the ones that are relevant for your research question. So you could create a composite score of all of these indicators, and that will provide a better understanding of participants' overall religiosity than a single item, or you might want to look at each one of these items separately. So let's take a little bit of a step back for a second. The concepts that we just discussed will be the basis for your research questions. So your research questions are based on theories, on literature, on previous research that has been done, or maybe your own, like more qualitative type of research. And that is the point of departure for any research project. They should be very clearly formulated, and they should be based on, as I said, previous literatures or theories. And these will cover the concepts that you want to investigate. In order to set up our hypothesis, we need to look at the relationship between the theory and research. And a hypothesis is basically another way of saying your proposed explanation for the research question. These should not be too broad, but not too narrow either. They should always have a clear, you should always have clear and simple hypotheses. And another thing that I have found very useful is that sometimes it's much better to have different hypotheses, more and different hypotheses that are simple rather than one complicated one. So rather than trying to explain in one single hypothesis your research question, what you can do is set up different hypotheses and try to answer each one of them separately. So how do we build our research questions? There's this framework, it's called the finer criteria for a good research question, which could help us shape the research question that we come up with. So this finer criteria suggests that a research question should be feasible. So can it be answered with the available time, data, and resources? Sometimes I think particularly researchers in the beginning of their career or students, they might want to answer quite a broad research question. But unfortunately, we always are constrained by the time and the resources available, right? So sometimes we need to make sure that the research question is feasible, and we should constrain it a little bit. A research question should also be interesting. So does it stir the interest of other stakeholders? Does it engage the stakeholders? Who are these particular stakeholders that might find this research question interesting? And who benefits from answering this question? Of course, depending on the field that you're in, you might have different stakeholders, and you might have different people who benefit from finding an answer to this particular research question. So obviously, in the field of like medical research, you know, it's quite clear who the beneficiaries of answering that question is. So anybody who suffers from a particular condition, for example, might find it welcome if we find a new cure for it. Research, we have to consider, you know, the different aspects. Sometimes the research questions are, if we manage to answer them, they're beneficial for policymakers, right? So for Infra for Next Gen project, we work closely with policymakers to make sure that we ask the right questions that would benefit their work as well. Other times it might be interesting for the general public. They might want to know how things are, what's the state of affairs of a particular topic in the world right now. So we need to kind of define these beneficiaries of the research questions. Another criteria for a good research question is that it should be novel, that it does bring some new knowledge or perspective to our field of research. And I think this is something that anyone who has written a dissertation, a thesis, or has conducted a research project might have this at some point. So you're preparing, you're doing all the literature review, you're struggling to find the right angle. You start your research, and as the research is in the field, or as you're doing the analysis, if you're using secondary analysis, you might find that someone else has done something very similar. Or maybe this is just my experience, I don't know. It's always useful to bring new knowledge to the field, right? And just remember that even if someone has done a similar project or has tried to ask a similar research question, you might always bring a new perspective, because your perspective might be different than of someone who has done the same research in a different context or in a different time. Another aspect of a good research question is that it should be ethical. So the research question, in order to answer this research question, we need to conduct some research. And we always need to do this responsibly and kind of think of the impact that this has on our participants, and be there to help in case they need it in any way. So sometimes when we do research on particular topics that might be a little bit more challenging, we have a responsibility towards our research participants to ensure that they are not affected in any way, in a negative way, by our research. And the last criteria that I'm going to talk about is that a research question should be relevant. So it should address a real world issue or a theoretical debate currently in the field. And this is something that, it will help you become more engaged with the process as well, but it will help other people kind of take an interest in your research. So, as I said, the hypotheses are our proposed explanations or a reformulation of the research question. The research question is, as I said, kind of connected to the concept. It's a bit more abstract, while the hypotheses try to bring this into like a more clear understanding. The purpose of hypothesis is to organize the project and provide its structure. So if you formulate several hypotheses for your research questions, it will give you the structure. It might give you an order of how to conduct the different research strands of your work. Hypotheses suggest the relationships between concepts or constructs and the indicators, which can be proved or disproved. And they should not be too broad and they should not be too narrow, as I already said. One thing is they try not to explain the entire world in your hypothesis, in one single hypothesis, but keep reformulating them until they become manageable and they can be answered with the available data. So let me bring this slide again and kind of populate it again. So like the research questions define our concepts. And then from the concepts to the indicators, we use hypotheses to connect them, right? There are two types of hypotheses. You have the null hypothesis, and that means the way we formulate it, so there is no effect of the manipulation of a variable on another variable, and the alternate hypothesis. So changes in one variable will lead to changes in another variable. So what we do in a research project is test a hypothesis by finding evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So we test it, and if we find that there is a difference, then we accept the alternate hypothesis. So again, our slide. So from the indicators, to move to the questions, we look for survey items or scales. And the next bit is going to be about this. So scales or composite scores, in order to define a particular concept and to investigate it, we can use one single item or an indicator in a survey, or we can use multiple ones from a scale. Why would we use a single item? Well, if you've ever run a survey project, you will know that there's never enough space in a survey to add multiple indicators, or there's not always enough space in a project to add multiple indicators. But also, if you have one good, clear indicator for a particular concept, you don't need to add more. But why would we add multiple indicators? Well, this will always help comprehension of more complex items. They will make them more valid measures. So your participants might, for example, vote conservative, although they are socially liberal. So if you're interested in understanding this bigger concept, you might want to add items related both to voting behavior and to their social perspective. Having multiple indicators will potentially increase the reliability of your findings. So wording of questions have a great bearing on the answers that people give. We can test the wording of questions. We can use kind of piloting testing. We can use cognitive testing to make sure that all participants understand the questions in a similar way. But if you have multiple indicators, that will also help as well. One example that I have from a survey that we were running a few years ago, not on the ESS, but in a different place where I was working, was we had this question about whether a town has a historical character. And we found that something in analysis, like was an item that was asked on several waves of this project, and the answers were not like something was happening there. Like the analysis, the statistical analysis pointed to a particular kind of disjointed answer in this question. So we went back and did some cognitive testing to try to understand what's going on with this particular question. And what we found is that people understood historical character in different ways. So in some cases, some participants understood it to mean that a town has like, is kind of like an old town with history and so on, while other participants understood it to mean there is a person, a character in history that comes from this particular town. So the way that people understood this question in different ways made the question unreliable. So what we had to do is like make sure that we change the question in such a way that participants would understand it the way that we want it to be understood. Having multiple indicators also offers us greater precision. So it allows for finer classification of people and better understanding of like the different nuances of a concept. So in analysis, you might be able to extract these nuances that otherwise might be unavailable if you only use one item. So if you have different items, you can potentially do different types of analysis that will create, different groups of people on how and to explain a certain concept. And another thing is that having multiple indicators helps summarize the information from multiple variables into one single variable. So we can create this composite scores summarizing the information from different variables. There are existing scales and indicators for some concepts that have been tested for validity and reliability. So basically, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And David will show you some of the items that we have brought together into an inventory of items as part of the Infra for Next Gen project. So, there are all these existing items in the world of social research that we don't need to try to reinvent again. There are also item banks. There are also previous surveys in a particular field that you can have a look at and try to use as inspiration for your new items. Using scales, what we can do is assess different levels of acceptability, appropriateness, importance, agreement, support or opposition, probability, desirability, participation, and so on. So scales are a good way of, it's basically asking people on a scale from, 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 or from strongly agree to strongly disagree, where would you place yourself? And particularly in our context, in our sociocultural context, people are very much used to using these scales, and they kind of they understand how to use it. Just a point here to say that this doesn't necessarily mean that in every single context in the world, in every cultural context, people know how to use scales and they find them easy to use. So again, think whether the scale is the right, like a scale is the right tool for your particular concept. When we decide to include a scale on a survey, we have different choices to make. So for example, whether we use odd or even number of choices on the scale, so odd or even number of, choices on the scale. And if we use an even number of response options, we want to force respondents to choose a side. So whether, if you have a scale from 1 to 4, that is going from strongly agree to strongly disagree, you will choose them, you will force the participants to choose either agreement or disagreement with a particular item. In some cases, we want to have an odd number of responses, and that allows people to choose the middle option. From an ethical point of view, we would recommend to never force participants to choose a side, because some participants might not want to choose a side. And if you give them an option where they can choose the middle point, it's somewhat better. But in some cases, you really need them to choose a side, right? It's important for your research question that the participants will choose a side. So consider the different aspects of deciding whether to choose odd or even number of choices. You might also consider whether you want to include a don't know option, which will allow people to skip a particular question. Especially with web surveys, we can force respondents to provide an answer. So they might not be able to advance to the next screen unless they give an option. But sometimes, we might want to include this I don't know option, or I prefer not to answer, because that would make your research a little bit more ethical in the way that you wouldn't force participants to choose a side. So let me give you an example now of a scale that is a very well-established scale. It's a scale that looks at self-esteem. It's the Rosenberg scale, and as you can see, oh my God, this is there's so many. It's been quite a while since this scale has been established. It's like from 1965. But it's a scale that has been used again and again, and it has been tested, and it is valid, and it is reliable. And even now, we use it quite a lot for self-esteem. So if you look at this particular scale, because it's important for the research question and for this particular scale, for its validation, participants were asked to choose a response from 1 to 4, so it's an even number, going from strongly agree to strongly disagree with each one of these items. And if you look at the items, they are, some of them will need to be reversed. So basically, all of the ones that are in red, after you have collected your data, you need to reverse them and then create a composite score. And that composite score will be the score of self-esteem for each participant in the survey. So this is how we use composite scores on scales. But again, we might not have the space available to do this for all of your concepts on the scale. So the higher the score, you do a sum or an average of the scores of the 10 items after reversing the ones in red. And the higher the score, the higher the self-esteem of that particular respondent. So here are the steps that I just described about quantitative research. So basically, we define the research questions. We talked about this. We operationalize the concepts and find the indicator variables. We consider the relationship between the variables. We formulate our hypotheses and choose the items to illustrate them. And then we move on to collecting the data or finding the data that is already available, doing the stats analysis, and writing up and dissemination. So we have covered quite a bit of theory, and now David will pick it up from here and discuss issues related to where to find the data that already exists and how to use some of the existing online tools to do preliminary analysis. And just a note here, remember there is a lot of data that is constantly being collected that you can always use. This data is available, and David will tell you more about where to find it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruxandra. So good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen before starting. Oh, thank you. Great. Nice to be here. I'm Dad Consolazio from the University of Milan. You might heard this several times during this presentation, so I go further with the content. And first of all, thank you, Ruxandra. I think your presentation was really enlightening because you provided an essential and clear overview of the fundamental issues to take into account when approaching to the issue of tuning, let's say, research questions, and articulate the theoretical questions into measurable objects. And now I will show some more technical things not related properly to data analysis, but concerning firstly where to find data among some existing free accessible resources, and secondly, where to find and how to use basic online tools that allows for some basic data exploration without having to start coding data, which are very useful for exploratory purposes, especially if you have some research ideas, but you still don't know if these could bring you to something that is worth going further. So don't worry, we won't go through something very technical. It's so I won't show any coding or difficult software to use to reach your purposes, but really a very simple, user-friendly online portals that allows you to search and manage information easily, quickly expanding your potential for survey data analysis. And more specifically, we will show five or six maybe little things that are the ones listed here, which of course do not cover the complete range of possibilities in relation to our topic today, but we made a selection including tools that are related mostly to the survey infrastructure we are working with in the context of our Infra for Next Generation project. And we are sure that this could be of great help in both searching for data and initially exploring them. So the first thing is data inventory. Ruxandra already mentioned it. Now we will go a bit more in detail on it. And within the context of our Infra for Next Gen project, among all the work packages, we had some with specific objective of compiling a comprehensive inventory of cross-national survey data relating to the relevant pillar of the Next Generation EU program, which are make it green, make it digital, make it healthy, make it equal, and make it strong. And the survey to review were the five research infrastructure directly involved in the project. So the European Social Survey, ESS, European Quality of Life Survey, EQLS, Gender and Generation Survey, GGS, European Value Studies, EVS, Information International Social Survey Program, ISSP, and the Eurobarometer. That was a really huge and demanding task. And the issue is that although these research infrastructures have extensive data and documentation publicly available, there is no central searchable repository of items for all. So researchers frequently need to explore common or similar items to identify which survey might be the best one to investigate a specific social phenomenon, or also they need to combine information from different surveys to create an integrated dataset. And to do such operations, they always have to move between different websites, study documentation, and all the related materials, which are often organized in different fashions. So our task, according to that, was to locate all the items as cross-nationally and identify those that were most pertinent to the objective of the five pillars of our project. And we explored several strategies to realize how to proceed in the most effective way. And finally, we decided that the best one was to digitize all the survey questionnaires, which originally came in a PDF format with different arrangements, and to put them together in a single Excel spreadsheet with a consistent format. And then, following the theoretical framework provided by our academic experts that are involved in the project for each pillar, we had some initial test coding to check for interpreter reliability. And finally, we were able to go through all the surveys and track the relevant items. That is, those that could be assigned to one or more of the five pillars. And for each survey question selected, we record the survey name, year, wave, item name, survey, question text, response categories, type of question. So it was a single question, single choice, multiple choice, numerical, categorical, or whatever, and repetition. So if the item were repeated in another year, in that case, in which wave, and the item name in that wave. But we will show you these more in detail in a moment. This is the result of our work. So as you can see, lots, like a huge amount of data because overall we have nearly 11,000 items, 3,287 of which came from the five research infrastructure survey and plus 7,000 and nearly 500 items from the Eurobarometer. As you can see, these are articulated among the different pillars Some are more common than the other, but we have really a huge amount of data. And I will show you this tool that we put online. Just need to change my screen. Just a moment. So, here it is. The link is provided in the slide, and we are it's exciting this part because I guess this is the first time we share this tool, the inventory, to a wider audience outside our project. So it's still work in progress. So if you find inconsistencies, you are more than welcome to report us. But basically, this is just a portal in which we put our Excel file online and made it searchable. So just row and columns as a usual data sets, and you can see you have the survey name, year, wave, the ID, so the name of the question in the survey, the text of the question, the response categories, and I will tell you later other things are to be added, so you will see more columns in the near future. And what you can do is to search for it, like to use it as a um, search engine, let's say, because now you see all the items, all the 11,000 items, but you have several ways of searching. The first one is by keywords. So Ruxandra mentioned religion, so I can look for items which include the word religion and automatically filtered. And you can see that these are in the European Social Survey. And I can combine it with the pillar with the survey name and with the year. Or I can also avoid using a keyword and just move with these filters. So, for instance, suppose that I'm interested in doing some research and I want to elaborate some research questions related to the digitization world, and so on. I can just see what's inside these six resources that refer to the content of the Make It Digital pillar. And in this case, I just have to select Make It Digital and then filter. And you can see these are all the items that are related to digital. And I can combine, so I can do digital in green, or even I can select basically more than one. And the same I can do with the survey, just picking up randomly, but in this case, I'm just selecting EQLS, EVS, and ISSP, just in case I have some specific reason to search just within this survey infrastructure. So the tool itself is very simple to use, nothing more than that. It's pretty intuitive. You just jump in and start playing with filters and keyword, but it is very useful because of its content, because we have 11,000 items almost from different survey infrastructure. So you don't have to go to each survey website and questionnaire anymore because you have just here, and you have also this primary categorization by uh, pillar, so a macro area um, topic to identify the content of the questions. And yeah, as I told you, the inventory is in work in progress mode. It is already accessible, so the link is not public, but you have it in this presentation, and you can already use it. But keep in mind that the content is temporary, let's say, so we are still working on it to improve it. And specifically, there are some things that we want to add. So item repetitions in different ways on the same survey infrastructure. So column telling you in which survey wave and year the item was present. So if you want to have some longitudinal analysis, this is very useful. And we want also to provide you with direct links to the sources to download the data. So again, you don't have to go to other websites, but just click and add the material you need. And we want to add also Chronos items, which is another survey part of the ESS. We want to add this inventory also for the Chronos items and put them in this tool. We are a bit ambitious, and we want also to try this automatic classification with artificial intelligence for the content of each item. This because now you can just filter by the pillar, but the pillar is very broad as a content categorization. Instead, we would like to provide you some like more specific topic like religion, social inequality, health, climate change, and the like, because the search bar work just with the content of the text. But for instance, if the question text is about climate change but does not mention climate change, it is not possible to find it through the search bar. So in this way, with some topic and subtopic, it will be possible to search by some content of the questions. And we are thinking also about enabling the Boolean operator, so and or the stuff like that in the search bar, because at the moment you will see if you try work just with the exact word that you can type in. Of course, we will enable table export, so you can export the results of your filtering in PDF or Excel or whatever you like. And we will keep this tool constantly updated with new survey ways, at least within the course of our project. So as there will be new ways for this survey, we will put in the tool. So this could be a very useful resources. The second one, another fundamental tool for searching for survey items from different research sources all at once is Gesis Search. As you probably know, Gesis is one of the largest, maybe the largest European infrastructure facility for the social science, and they cover the whole process of research. But what is of interest here is that they archive literally tons of data, and these are made available to be searched and downloaded with a very effective search engine that is indeed Gases Search. And just to give you an idea, you can find all the Eurobarometer there, but also the EVS and ISSP that we already mentioned, and many, many more. And a good way to start looking for specific data when you still don't know where the variables you need can be found is to start with it and go to see it. Okay, so just this website of Gases, and you can search by keyword. So we talking about climate change, just to have one, you see that you can find research that data, so the whole survey containing this topic, or if you're interested in variables, you just click on variables, and you see variables that include uh, related to the topic of climate change. And again, a lot of filters here. You can, of course, filter by topic and study group. So, for instance, you can see here, yeah, you have the history of my searches, sorry, all the studies that are present in this archive. You can see that you have the Eurobarometer, more. So if you already know where to look, for instance, you want to use just the Eurobarometer, so you can select it, in this case, the Flash Eurobarometer, and then use a keyword, like would be religion, given that we talk about religion, and then you can also filter by publication year or collection year, which might be different, geography, so the country, and the source is always Gesis, and also if you know the study title. So again, very intuitive to use, just play around with it, and you discover that very many data that you need are actually here, like existing and ready to be downloaded and used. And what is very interesting is that you can also search for a exact question and see if it's present in more than one survey. So again, if you want to do some longitudinal analysis of repeated items, maybe you find one item in, let's say, the Eurobarometer, and then you're interested in not having just that time point, but the whole time series. And so you might wonder, okay, where there are where is present the same variables in all the other Eurobarometer? Eurobarometer are literally hundreds of surveys, so you don't have to go through all the PDF and search for the question, but you can search from this portal. So I can find a question that is repeated right now, but simply if you put one in the search bar, you will find all the ones that all the survey ways in which this is repeated, and it's very simple and easy to use. Okay, and so far we have been talking about finding data, and the next two online resources instead will focus on exploring data, meaning that they allow to produce some first univariate or bivariate visualizations that can guide towards the refining of research questions based on some initial raw evidence. And the first one is the portal of the data portal of the European Social Survey, the ESS. And yeah, let's go through it. Okay, so this is simply the data portal of the ESS from which you can download all the data. For instance, we click here on European Social Survey, and what you can do, of course, is just to click on one way, for instance, the most recent one, ESS round 11, and if you click on integrated file, you see that you have the link for downloading. You just need a free account. You can also log in with Google, and you can download the data in uh, SPSS or Stata format. But of course, these might take some time if you're not confident with that, or maybe you want to explore more data and you want to do it in a quicker way. So instead of doing this, you just click on Variable Viewer and you're automatically enabled to view what's inside this wave, but you can do it for all the waves. And you can select a variable, like selecting by teams or just typing in as you prefer. Um, so let's say first one, media and social trust, internet use, how often, and you see the question text, and automatically you see the distribution of the variables according to the countries that are involved uh, in this survey wave. And the results are already weighted with the sample weights, so it is really useful. You see this one and automatically map also to see the geographical distribution. And if you pass your mouse uh, across each country, you see also the bar chart. So, and you have different format. This is for categorical questions, but if you pick a continuous one, this one, let's say, so internet use, but in minutes, you see you have the same structure, so the results by country, but instead of the bar chart, you have this block plot with the mean and all the usual things, so the highest and lowest values, the median and the like, and again, you have the map. And there is another one, another format, really for um, political participation. Say, no, it was not that one. Basically, if the scale is from 1 to 10, instead that from 1 to 4, you have a quite rather different format, but the visualization is the same. The, this is just to explore one variable at a time, but of course, as I told you, it is possible also to have some bivariate analysis, so to cross two variables, and it works in the exact same way. You just have to select the second variable. So we uh, keep the variables that we explored before, so internet use, how often, and we can add another one. So I can, for instance, I can see how it is distributed by gender, and automatically I have the same results as before, but for each country it is indeed stratified by gender. In case of the bivariate mapping, you don't have the maps, but just uh, the bar chart. And I forgot to tell you, you can do it also for the variable viewer. You can just click here and you can export the image or also the table. So if you want to download the file behind it, like the number, and put it on Excel and work it to produce a different graph, you can do it. So again, without having to download the data and just from here. So it is very useful because it allows you exploring the whole set of variables present in the Word edition of the ESS without downloading and start coding and programming. And of course, it is not enough for a proper research article, for a complete study, but as an initial way to explore what's inside and to elaborate initially the research question, at least in your mind, it is very useful to see these varied associations. Let me go back to my presentation again. Okay. The second tool is eNextGen, which is being developed within the framework of our Infra for NextGen project again. And actually, the purpose of this tool is to share data outside the academic world, so to communicate to a wider audience, such as politicians, policymakers, citizen groups, NGOs, as well as the general public, with a particular emphasis on the young and those in education. Nonetheless, it could be a good starting point for researchers, as well as it allows exploring data from different sources all at once, again, being pretty informative as regards the territorial distribution of specific items related to the five next generation EU pillars. So it is a very useful tool for an initial exploration of geographical patterns. Uh, Again, I will show you very quickly. Here it is. Now it's in work in progress, so it is not full of variables, but just some temporary initial one because again they are still developing it, but it is very simple to use. You have some of the information that you find in the inventory. There is a selection of these items, and they will be made available in this interface. You can see these maps, and again, if you go through countries, you can see the data, and you can search by keyword, by period, and if you click on settings, you can mm, choose between different visualizations. So beginner, the data behind are exactly the same, but it is just a simplified version with less things to be possible to click on the interface or intermediate or advanced with all the features available. And then you can also filter by the pillar as we did in the inventory. So strong, green, healthy, equal, digital, and all. So again, nothing really complicated, but uh, very useful because you have many data. So you have the data of the five research infrastructure service that I told before, and you can also compare maps. So if you want to compare two indicators, and then you can also select response group, so women, men, young people, middle age, and change period as already said. So it is very interesting. Another one that it is possible to see is this eValue tool. So basically, the eNextGen tool is an extension of this eValue tool. Indeed, you can see that the layout, the outlook is exactly the same. The eValue was developed within the European value study. So this just cover the European value study. You don't find any information from other surveys. The exact purpose of the eNextGen tool is to extend this tool to uh, higher number of server infrastructure and then higher number of items to be visualized. But now it can be very useful to look at the value because it's not work in progress, it's complete. So you have a lot of information inside, and maybe if you're interested in it, you can start using the value while waiting the index again to be completed. I'm not sure you how it works because it is exactly the same as the index gen tool. Okay, yeah, you can find the slide of the value tools in the presentation, but I already told you about that directly in the browser. And the last thing, the last result we want to share is a training one, the TGS teaching datasets. These are datasets that are already prepared for simple and also more complex analysis using GGS data. And keep in mind that differently from other European and international surveys, which span over a variety of topics, the GGS, as its name suggests, it's very specific in its content. Some of its basic themes include family formation, fertility, children, like partnership quality, well-being, work-life balance, family and gender attitudes, and the like. And it is a large-scale cross-national panel survey conducted in 20 countries worldwide, spanning 2 rounds of data collection and featuring repeated interviews with the same individuals, so offering rich longitudinal analysis. And if you want to delve into one of these topics, the teaching datasets are great because typically, despite the best effort to share ready-to-use files, survey data might be difficult to handle, especially if you are a young researcher or in general, if you are less confident with these data. And it might be necessary to code missing values, recode variables, harmonize items between countries, detect the most relevant items to be kept among hundreds or even thousands of variables or whatever. And the situation, is even worse if you want to prepare your dataset for some longitudinal analysis, and you need to reshape the file from wide to long or long to wide, set up person most variables, check for consistencies, and the like. So, especially if you don't know what's inside the data, you want to explore some variables to check for some correlations or patterns at the beginning. It could be very time consuming and sometimes even frustrating to deal with such a complexity. With this regard, the teaching datasets are perfect to start playing around with data. They are developed from the first wave of the GGS second and include a subset of respondents from 12 countries with a selection of variables, and they come into two options. So a starter dataset for, let's say, entry-level data analysis with 87 variables, useful for simple data exploration and basic regression analysis. And also an advanced datasets for more experienced analysis with 124 variables, including detailed life events and timelines, make it suitable for more complex longitudinal analysis like event history analysis. And this is very useful if you want to start working on individual life trajectories with a ready-to-use dataset with information referring to the retrospective modules already organized and literally ready to be used, like to run the analysis. And on the GGS website, at the link provided within our slides, there are also two introductory videos for an overall duration of about 10 minutes, so very quick stuff to explain in detail what these datasets contain and how the datasets are organized. And so we really suggest you to have a look at it because it is really rare to have such a valuable resource, especially in relation to parent data. And you can also free download, of course, the data in Stata, Excel, and SPSS format. I guess I'm done with the tool overview. I give back the floor to Julia, Ruxandra, or whoever want to say something. So thank you for the attention.